Okay, we've actually had loads of questions come up already on here. I think the first one, well, there were a few from Maggie. Maggie, did you want to go ahead with the first question that you asked?
I asked, I can't really remember. I asked if you oh, I did have a question for Suli. I was just wondering, like, in the future, do you think that people living in the future will like sort of create something like steampunk for the era that we're living in now, you know, wearing things such as like microchips and CDs and DVDs and things like that? Do you think that's a possibility?
Hi. Yeah, I think it is, but I think that most importantly, we'll have to look at there's nothing that is happening that we can see presently that we know for sure that's going to be in the future. We don't know what kind of representation we're going to have in the future. Problems that we have presently, like the present pandemic or like this global crisis of like having people like Donald Trump in government, might be things that they will remember us by. So like if you look at things like microchips in clothing or like little smart devices or like your cell phone, it's more about the kind of role that they're gonna have in representing us as a subculture. So perhaps like in the future they'll look at our cell phones and be like, oh, so these people started using Twitter and that like caused an incredible revolution, because this is the way that Donald Trump was doing propaganda. This is the way that many social activists were making themselves known. And I like to think that when it comes to like these devices and like the way that we are going to be represented, it's going to be through these, but also that is very scary because there are many things that are currently happening that are far from being okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much.
I'm just following on from that. If Matthew is still here, they had a question for Suli too. Don't know if they're still here, but they were asking, currently producing a cyberpunk project and found many similarities but also differences with steampunk. From your presentation, I feel that in steampunk they are afraid of technology, whereas in cyberpunk they embrace technology. Would you agree or disagree or see any similarities between the two?
There are many places where steampunk and cyberpunk actually overlap to the point that it's a bit confusing to say which category, like where it starts or where it ends. I think like the main difference between steampunk and cyberpunk is that cyberpunk has already undergone the changes caused by technology. So they are a lot more accepting of all of these new technologies and devices. Whereas with steampunk, you have to think that it comes from the Victorian era. So people were still getting used to all of these devices being in use. And like if you, for example, during the Victorian era, if you moved away from the city and into more rural areas, they will not have as much knowledge of these technologies and they will almost mystify them. So like the main difference is that like that acceptance and the fact that steampunk focuses on the mysticism of the machines and their purpose and how they work and how they can be used. Whereas in cyberpunk, it's more on the basis that people already know how these technologies work and how they can. And the thing that's important is in understanding the language and the way that they can accomplish their goals.
Thank you so much. Maggie, I think Wilson had a question for your presentation where he asked, or Wilson, would you like to ask Maggie the question?
Okay, no, my question is about like, because it's such a useful thing to have illustration to use on medical because it's more like clear without like all the blood and all the stuff. And would it be more, in the future, would it be more like advanced that they use like 3D hologram or things in medical study?
Yeah, I think that would be a really cool thing to happen. I think definitely like technology is working its way towards it. It's just thinking about like, is it needed? I think a lot of medical students have access to human bodies at one time or another. I know some of the medical students I know have like sat in on dissections and things like that. So I guess it's just thinking about what is needed by the student and like creating things for education purposes rather than, you know, just thinking, can we do it? We should think, yeah, should we do it? So yeah. Thank you.
Samantha, I have a question, comment.
Yes, Lee, go on. Yeah.
Thank you all for such brilliant presentations. It was really, really stunning, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you. I wondered actually, so I saw there's so much connection, I think, between so many of your talks in terms of thinking about the ways that technologies enable us to experiment and to visualize and to kind of render or express anxieties or certain kinds of just observations about the world around us. And I wondered if you guys, maybe if you wanted to say something about the way that you are implementing this in each of your practices, how you're using your research and the things that you've discovered or the things that you've thought about in this process in your own practices. Just to elaborate a bit on that, if you like.
Well, for me, I guess medical illustration is just something that I've always really been interested in since I studied it at like GCSE level. I studied a bit of history of medicine, so it's not really something that I would like go into myself. But I think it's a really interesting topic. Just so it's just like it's just like a personal research thing for me, not like a professional research for me anyway.
Sure. I understand that completely. But there's so many interesting things about illustration that you're learning, even though you're specializing in your research is specializing in an area that you personally don't partake. I mean, there's so many things about what illustration can do that I'm sure you find it in your own illustration practice, and even though you might be kind of looking in an entirely different direction. So I hope there's still something you're getting from the research into your own practice.
No, definitely, for sure. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, especially looking at where the illustration has originated from, like especially to do with like how they would make things so accurate, you know, how they would put these square blankets on the sort of like crocheted square blankets on the human body to sort of work out each square on the body, and then like detailed, like to make it so detailed. Yeah, I think it's really interesting how they've come up with these ideas to do this all these years ago. I don't know about the others.
You want to go?
Yeah, fine, you go first.
Okay. For me, I've always been a fan of Vocaloid for a long time, and it has like a lot of like, I get a lot of inspiration from it, and I don't think I'll go on that road because I think it's like at the moment it's mainly in Japanese and like in Japan, and I don't think I would develop that role, but it does give me a lot of inspiration from my own kind of style or my own approach on different kind of, because Illustrator would do like, sometimes they would do music album and sometimes they got advertised to do something, commissioned to do something like different kind of things related in the music industry. So I think it's helpful for me, yeah.
Manuela?
Yeah, not my video on. Yeah. So for me, I would say I have been trying to use Technofashion in my daily projects, and I actually on my final collections I try to use it, but all of this happened, the pandemic, so I couldn't finish. But I did have some time to experiment on my pre-collection and to add some lights, like, because Technofashion can be quite complex, so I tried to start with something simple. But it is something that I would like to explore more and to try to focus more on doing Technofashion as a fashion designer.
As for me, like the way that I looked at steampunk is how I kind of want to look at everything. I don't just want to accept that aesthetics are there just because. I would like to think that behind every set of aesthetics that you encounter in everything or in any genre, there's a hidden meaning of certain narratives that are being told through the use of aesthetics. So how they just how society is a bit more corrupt in those narratives, or how the machines are being used in a way in which like people really know how to use them, and they will exploit them even more than in steampunk when they're still trying to figure out how to like exert more power or dominance from one social class to the other. Whereas in cyberpunk, they already know how it works and they know how to do these things with machines. So yeah, for me, it's about just figuring out like every time that I choose a set of aesthetics, what am I trying to transmit with them?
Just looking back to the other questions. I think we had a question from Wilson for Manuela. Looking at, Wilson, did you want to ask your question about the techno gigs and garments?
Okay. Manuela, I was just figuring out that because I saw those kind of designs, sometimes quite like heavy oriented. So I was thinking like if people actually going to Techno Gig, like how can they apply to it to like wear it very nicely, but at the same time like doesn't avoid them to party in the party, yeah, in the club.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, as I said before, Technofashion is a lot complex. So there is one store called Cyberglock in London, which probably most people know. And they actually have a lot of Technofashion garments that they are used for going to raves. And it's Technofashion can be just a jacket with some lights on it, or some goggles that have like a lot of lights and a lot of effects on it. So in this case, like for this presentation, I chose to talk about the designers that I feel take Technofashion as something more than just the aesthetics. So it might be complex to try to use those garments to any gig, but I think that is doable, because at the end, even if they seem heavy, for example, Benas Farahi, all her garments are 3D printed, so they are actually quite light. The materials, for example, Jingao uses are plastic, and she tries to experiment a bit with fabrics. So even if it seems like it's a lot and it might be a burden to wear, it actually isn't. So it basically depends on what you want to try.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any final questions? Suli, I think you had a question for Wilson regarding representation in Vocaloid.
Yeah, I was wondering because the Vocaloids that I have seen seem to belong to a certain ethnical background, and I was wondering if if perhaps in the future they're gonna try to change that up a little.
As far as I know at the moment, with the newest engine of Vocaloid 5, they did have people of color the character to like represent it. And I think like the more and more like Western influence in the company and the whole community, I think they do have a lot of attention on racial kind of like problems or representation around it. So I think in the future, I think there will be more like variety of it. Yeah. And even for the first like the one that I just said, the first like Lola and Leon, those two from 2004, they actually are soul vocalists. So in my dissertation, I did like kind of think about like because both of them are advertised as soul vocalists, which is people stereotypically would think of like dark-skinned people because like soul music style is from them. So that's why I think at the beginning they already think about this kind of representation, but in the future I think there will be more and more like mature kind of technique to make it more interesting. Because also like the voice of people talking about like people of color, like they will sound differently than, I don't know, like Asian people might have an accent, or Black people might sound like differently from like white people, like stereotypically. But sometimes like it really like depends on the upbringing of each person. So I think it's a way that the community, the whole folklore community, need to explore it until they find like an answer to it. Yeah.
Alberto, I think you had a question next.
Is it me?
I think so.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to draw a parallel between, well, first of all, thank you all. And it's really a pleasure to see how engaged you are with these themes, which are clearly pretty much one of the key things that has been revealed exactly by the pandemic, in a sense that here we are on a kind of an online platform connected by servers, artificial intelligence silently operating behind the screen to create all the connections and the algorithmic needs of packets of hypertext that sends us all around. So we exist exactly because of artificial intelligence, and more now in this particular situation where our bodies are separated. So I wanted to draw a parallel which encounters the social rather than technological, or connects the social and the technological between Suli. And of course, you analyzed, you started with Metropolis as one of the key artistic responses to a modernity that was already showing some of its signs of the potential for reappropriating the means of productions in a sense of technology. So the machine, owning the machine back to the workers and that sort of things. And then Wilson, you actually, I love this vocalized things. You're actually showing a matter of emancipation for a post-work future where the independent producer can do without engaging an actual vocalist, probably because they don't have the money to pay them, or maybe there's no one around because everyone is using that software, and there's no more jobs for those who are actually providing that services live. So there is a sense of, I'm trying to connect a certain idea of future, a post-capitalist future, labor, and the way in which these technologies that obviously emancipate a certain group of people, that clearly are creatively destroying another rank of labor that has, in a sense, been part of humanity for quite some time. So there is a certain, so on one hand, machines are owning the machines and the means of production emancipates us. Yeah. On the other hand, enslaves us, like we've seen so there's certain things in Metropolis. I wanted to connect this social aspect because, in a sense, you both talk about the future, and future-oriented practices is what we are really good at in artistic and thinking, a cultural, visual culture. How do you see this kind of social technological axis that creates, destroys, enables, disable?
This question, I mean, it requires me like deep thinking about it, but
the way I see it, I don't think that machines are ready to substitute things that we do just yet. And even if they were, with like things like Wilson was saying about Vocaloid and using these voice synthesizers to create new songs, there's still a human element to it that cannot be quite substituted. Like even if it's like a little thing on the timbre of the voice, or like the way that they think about the lyrics, or like they're trying to encapsulate emotions into the lyrics of songs. Those are things that Vocaloids will never be able to achieve, no matter how much technology becomes better. So it just depends. Like,
I was more, sorry to interrupt, sorry, just to make it clear, I was more thinking of how, for instance, emancipate one set of individuals, those independent producer, but at the expenses of other, and not because they are a better or not product. Technology doesn't necessarily move in ways that substitute one product because it's better than the previous one. It's simply a question of time and money and capital. All the orchestral work that up to a point from until the 90s was done for soundtracks, and it required a lot of money because you had to pay an orchestra to create a soundtrack. It then started to shift into sampling because the whole orchestra were in the hands of musicians who then emancipated themselves, and they were able to offer packages for the film industry much cheaper than the ones who said, oh, I need an orchestra, man. We need to have a 25-piece orchestra and the horn sections and all the rest. I said, forget, man, I can do it for half the price and you don't need that. And as a result, orchestral work and move into a completely different situation. And it's only recently with certain kind of large productions that those capacities were there. So I'm talking about work, labor, and the social as not as whether the machine produces good quality substitute for the real thing. Do you see what I mean? It's the market, it's the labor market, like the one you're entering into.
So do you think that it's a good trend that people like getting less and less labor of like people who wants like, oh, I want the company want to produce music, and they just like, oh yeah, produce some music, and no, but now like people can just use the software to create it. They like becoming having labors is becoming less and less necessary. Is that your question?
Yeah, I think that it also because we're coming from a position where we are now with a lot of people in furlough and stopping the machines in this kind of way of as reawaken talk about universal basic income, which basically sort of decouple labor and earnings from the world. So I think that the idea of universal basic income, it's obviously been brought about by the fact that everyone stopped working, or actually there's a certain huge amount of people that stopped working, and says, well, can we institute a system where people are paid not for the labor that they produce, but simply for the fact of being part of a certain kind of group of, social group. So yeah, certainly there is that question in the air, which is why I was asking, how do you see all this AI, robotics, technology that you have explored on a social level in the labor market? Because I think that's where you are going into. But maybe it's too big a question to.
Yeah.
I just think it's very easy to be excited by these things.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of loop of saying you can be an entrepreneur, you can develop these things, it's all there, this is the future, there's plenty of money behind it, you only need to come up with an idea and then it's all there. And sometimes with the creative industry we foster that discussion, sometimes without thinking necessarily of the social consequences of what that actually generates in terms of the labor market, for instance.
I think it's a lifelong question to think about as a human being, and also like myself, just jump out from society, like what is happening. And I think the technology of Vocaloid is about, I think it's about a new option to create music rather than thinking about like, oh, is it a trend to not use other labor, or need to rethink about how people need to pay for each person, like how much they need to pay according to their talent. It's true that like the production we're thinking about, like some people are exploiting other people in any kind of industry, not just in the music industry, but in all those industry. And I think now people have more option, like even on Instagram, they have like influencer, and they can have their own brand and can proceed and have connection with other people. I think it just gives like a new option for people to, a new path for people to become succeed, or in any kind of sense to just earn a living, or just doing a hobby. So I don't really think about the question with the labor market as such, as like, I don't know. I mean, thank you for the question, Alberto, but I'm not sure.
Sorry, I probably
not answer you properly. This, I think I need to do more research on it. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really excellent point that Alberto is raising, and I think actually that's hopefully what the research process that you've all done has kind of enabled you to practice, which is critical thinking, which means that things are not simple. Things aren't black and white. There are positives and negatives to all kinds of issues, and for you to be to make it a practice to think about both the positive and negatives of these technologies, because we all tend to get very excited about things, and sometimes we need to consider the context and the histories, and how, especially as things with technology change so quickly, that it's difficult to be able to position ourselves and in relation to these changes. So I think it's a practice, and it's okay for you not to know the answers at the moment, but just that you are asking the questions and that you're thinking about those sorts of things, I think is really valuable, and that's part of what this research process is all about. So don't lose hope. Keep going. keep asking questions.
Thank you, Lily. No, thank you guys. It's been good. Like, yeah, I think doing the research it's raising more questions, but at the same time you're learning at the process. That's what I was kind of aiming for when I start reading or start doing different kind of research. Yeah.
I think in terms of the just a really quick comment in terms of Vocaloid and sort of around, I've just got a lot of friends who are in the music industry at the moment and feeling this sense of redundancy in their roles, and that, performing over Zoom, and then there's also questions in the future of how people are going to be able to travel on these international festivals, and whether the hologram could act as an alternative, but also thinking further into the future around sustainability and the environment, and kind of flying several musical acts from another country to another, and the environmental damage of that, and would a hologram act as a suitable alternative, I suppose. But yeah, I got thinking about that a little bit.
Overall, I think that technology is actually supposed like more advantageous than this was a problem. Like as Wilson was saying, now you have a Vocaloid and you can use it to like create more things. And me as an animator, I am glad that I have access to the Adobe Cloud, because before, if like for example, at the moment I'm on furlough, but I'm being able to create new things and to implement them into my portfolio. But if I didn't have access to these technologies and I was an animator like back in the day, I will need a studio, I will need lights, a light table, colors, cell, like all of these things that will suppose a lot more of effort and money and time and space. Like they will occupy double the space that I have now on my table. I will actually need a proper studio and a director, a producer, like all of these roles, I can do them myself. I can work by myself. And it's a shift, because you're no longer reliant on that space, on that structure, having all of these people there to, and you can feel the pressure at times, but it's not impossible. And I feel like more people are currently shifting from these traditional studio structures to like being a one-man army, which it has its advantages and disadvantages. It's just how we are adapting to the changing in the times.
I think we've got a few last questions, but I thought Macca's was fascinating because they've asked, do you think mainstream singers may choose to become a Vocaloid character in the future? And this actually really, just to throw in my research, I got very fascinated with a lot of these digital death services which promise to so that kind of store up all your data and create a kind of avatar version of you which you can communicate with after you pass away. And that's kind of based on the amount of labor that you put into social media and like write about yourself. But I think maybe, Wilson, this was in your thesis, there was a musician, maybe it was Tupac, who did a hologram performance.
Yeah, Tupac, which is the late rappers back in the 90s. And in 2012 in Coachella, like there's with Scooby-Doo and Dr. Dre, they make a concert with a hologram with Tupac. But the whole model, it's like Hatsune Miku on the stage, but they pre-recorded the song and they make a model out of it. And they use that technology to try to recreate the performance with Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre together on stage. And I think everyone is trying to do that now. And I remember there's one Japanese late traditional singer. I forgot the name. I need to do research, but she passed away, and people preserved her voice and make a voice bank to like create it with like, it's like Tupac, but like they try to like make a voice bank out of it. And I think it was released in 2017. I'm not sure, but it's not like a mainstream, like people wouldn't like just go for it. So maybe in the future, if the technology is good enough to make the voice band sounds very realistic as a person, then I think it will become kind of a mainstream for a little bit. But I think people are still really fascinated by real human vocal, right? I don't think they would put Vocaloid or any voice bank over like a real vocal, even though they sound real, because they still have the difference of it. Because nowadays, actually, I mean, it's not mature enough for the technology, but some producer or some tuner for Vocaloid actually does a really good job to make people sound as realistic as possible. And it does sound realistic, like in human voice, because they include like breath and different kind of like vocal fry. And I just show you the rock kind of like groan. There are different kind of features on it to make it like sounds more realistic. But in the near future, I don't think that is the case. But I think like Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus, I think people on some like weird subculture, they already like pursue their voice bank together. But I don't think it's realistic enough, but they have their voice bank. I bet. But thank you for your question, Maka.
Does anyone have a final question before we close today's panel? Anyone else? No? I mean, I could talk about this all day. It's so creepy. But okay, thank you so much, everybody. That was really fascinating. And yeah, thank you to all the panelists. And I will see you all soon.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye. Have a nice lunch break.
Well done, everyone.
Well done.